We've been really lucky to host a few students from the Adrift Lab in Tasmania. And Emma Nichols is doing her honors research there. She's really concerned about the human impacts that we're having, and she's trying to understand how that's impacting species in the natural world. So her research is focusing on the accumulation and travel of plastic debris from Henderson Island. So this is a really remote, uninhabited island of the South Pacific region, but the beaches can become inundated with our trash, basically, that drifts there. So I'm going to bring Emma in here now. There we go. Hey, Emma, how are you?
Good. How are you going, Joe?
Good, good. How are things in Tassie?
It's actually a nice day, not too cold. So I
Good.
shouldn't complain. Went out swimming this morning, so yeah, it's been great.
So I shouldn't tell you how here in the Northern Hemisphere it was nice and warm and lovely today.
Yeah. Well, it's definitely not getting that way at the moment. Still,
Fair enough.
yeah, getting
All right.
something here.
Well, Emma, I'm going to let you take over for a little bit, and then we'll wrap up with a little Q&A action.
Sounds great. Cool. Thanks, Joe.
All right.
Okay, I'll start sharing my screen. Alrighty. Here. Now let's go from the beginning. Okay, how's that looking on your end, Joe?
Looking good.
Is that looking okay?
Yeah, it's perfect. Nice and full screen.
That's all good?
Yep.
Awesome. All right. I'll just hide this little one, I guess. Oh, no, it's all good. Awesome. Okay. Well, yeah, thank you all so much for joining in and listening to me today. I'm extremely excited and honoured to be presenting for you all. So just a little bit about myself before we jump straight into things. So as Joe said, I am from Tasmania, which is an island state of Australia. Tassie, I think, is just a stunning place to have grown up. On the left here, just a few of my pictures from snorkeling and hiking over the years. And I'm really lucky that I've lived in really close proximity to the sea my whole life. And so from about 6 years of age, during my first snorkel, I just absolutely felt connected with this underwater world, and I just loved it. So I guess one of the key events that led me down this path of plastic research was actually sparked from a hike about 3 years ago, where a couple of friends and I were walking a very secluded coastline in the state's Wild West. And just remember feeling this heartbreak as we looked up the coastline and there were just thousands of scattered bits of plastic debris washed up. And so this was just a huge eye-opener for me that this issue was essentially at my front door. And so if you look at the picture here on the right, this is actually of one of the items that I took back with me from this hike. And you can actually see bite marks very clearly all around this bottle. So something had mistaken this item for food. So with this very personal experience, I reached out to the Adrift Lab and expressed my interest in studying with them. And from there, I conducted my research here in Hobart. And this research, as Joe mentioned, was focused on the plastic accumulation on Henderson Island. And this island has been named quite frequently as one of the world's most remote islands. And I'll just explain this further in a few slides. So plastic really is this incredible material in that, it's helped in trading goods all around the world. It's helped provide sanitation, medical treatments, providing disease prevention, and even safe drinking water and food to some of the world's most vulnerable people around the world. So although my talk will be mostly on a few of the issues caused by plastics, I think it's still really important to just recognize how much it has helped us. But of course, plastics have now become such a cheap material to produce that we now manufacture excessive amounts of this material, and our waste management around the globe just can't handle what we're producing. So plastics as we know them today have actually only been around in mass production for 70 years. And it's interesting then to reflect on how prevalent plastics have become in our everyday lives. So even by just looking around you right now, you see some kind of plastic, whether that's the platform you're watching this presentation through, maybe you're wearing a shirt made of polyester, could even be a cup of tea with a tea bag sitting in it. So plastics are just everywhere, and they've even been found in our very own Earth's atmosphere. So of all the plastic that's ever been produced, it's a bit of a scary statistic that only about 9% of all of that plastic has actually been recycled. The remainder of all that plastic waste heads into our landfills or, unfortunately, into our natural environment. So what makes plastic such a successful material is that it's highly malleable, and we can shape that into essentially anything that we want. And it's quite lightweight. And so these properties make these items quite buoyant in some cases, and that means they can be easily picked up by strong wind and heavy rain events. And this may cause plastics from landfill to become mobile. So plastics can then float until they reach a nearby water source, maybe a storm water drain or a creek, and eventually these water sources will lead out to the ocean. And it's been estimated that over 12 million tonnes of our plastic waste will enter our ocean every single year. So what happens once these plastics do reach the ocean? Now, it's often portrayed, particularly by media and even throughout our social media, is that when plastics enter the ocean, they accumulate in these ocean gyre systems. Now, there's 5 of these gyres around the world, and a gyre being a circulating ocean current system heavily influenced by wind. They can accumulate a range of different debris over time, but scientists have actually found that floating ocean plastics, so the plastics we can see if we look at the surface water of the ocean, only accounts for about 1% of all the plastic that's ever entered the ocean. So I'll just let that sink in, because that in itself really blew my mind when I first heard about it. So then it begs to question what's actually happening to the rest of that plastic. Where is it all going? So scientists from around the world, they've suggested there's likely a range of removal mechanisms at play here. And so this is a great little infographic from Van Sibyl that depicts this really nicely. And so when plastics enter the ocean, they're exposed to a range of natural processes. Floating plastics can be exposed to high amounts of UV radiation. They can also be at the demise of the conditions of the sea. So if there's rough waves, they can cause plastics to rub or hit against other hardy objects. This can cause them to form weak spots within those plastics until they eventually fragment and break up into smaller and smaller particles. And this could cause them to eventually be pushed easily down in the further in the water column. Plastics can also sink from biofouling, which is where organisms, maybe barnacles or algae, can actually accumulate and colonize over the top of these floating items. And that can increase the weight of those plastics enough for them to actually start sinking on their own. So they could either sink further in the water column or even until they reach the bottom of the seabed. So there's also a chance for ingestion. So maybe seabirds coming through and ingesting floating plastics, and this can be transporting plastics away from those areas too. So another depository site for our ocean plastics is the beaching of plastics on remote islands and coastlines. Now, remote islands in particular, they can provide a really neat research opportunity. To get as accurate representation as possible of plastics in the marine environment, we need somewhere that has as little or no human presence as possible. And this is because where people can access locations easily, people can either directly add plastics through accidental or purposeful littering, or they could remove plastics through cleanup events. And from a scientific perspective, you want as little of either of those influences on a study site to be able to form a better understanding and build greater confidence in assessing the quantities of ocean plastics. So this brings us to Henderson Island. Now, Henderson is an incredibly remote island in the South Pacific, one of 4 islands that make up the Pitcairn Island group, which you can see here on the right-hand side. Henderson has the little arrow pointing to it. Henderson also has the added benefit of being uninhabited by humans. So the island is actually 155 kilometres from the closest human population, or 96 miles away, and over 2,350 kilometres, or 1,500 miles from the closest urban centre, which holds about 25,000 people. So as well as the island being generally remote and uninhabited, this area also is just very rarely visited by people, which makes it for a perfect study opportunity. So Henderson is also listed as a UNESCO World Heritage Site. It's a raised coral atoll with a range of endemic organisms, and this includes 4 endemic land bird species, and the crake on the far right, this is one of those. And it's important for endangered green sea turtles that come annually to nest, and it's also a stopover for migratory seabirds during their flight paths as well. So the image on the left here is of Henderson Island, arrow pointing to a beach called East Beach. And this beach is shown on the right, just absolutely covered in large plastic debris. Now, both the eastern and the northern beaches of Henderson Island are particularly prone to plastic accumulation because these areas are exposed to really harsh wind and wave events compared to the western region of the island that's more sheltered. So in 2015, a team of researchers, including 2 of my past supervisors, studied plastics on Henderson's north and east beaches, and they actually estimated over 38 million pieces of plastic were present over those 2 beaches. They found that fishing-related items were by far the most prevalent items by weight. They accounted for 60% of all sampled plastics, and the most common items by individual count were again fishing related items, so fishing nets and fishing ropes, as well as single-use plastics. So plastic lids and plastic bottles were among some of the most common items found. And then they also predicted that over 3,570 new pieces of plastic were washing ashore every single day on Henderson Island. So from there, we fast-tracked to 2019, which is 4 years after this first major plastic survey for the island. And the expedition in 2019 served as a follow-up study to track any changes in the plastic accumulation since 2015. So again, with a combination of quadrats and transects, we were able to quantify sampled plastics, and we found that microplastics had actually increased on the island significantly since those first initial findings in 2015. Now, just for reference, the term microplastics are commonly given to plastics smaller than 5 millimeters in size. And something that's not commonly reported on is nanoplastic, which is a term given to the smallest identifiable plastic particles, and they're even smaller than microplastics. So nanoplastics are between 1 micron and 0.05 millimeters in size. So we can't see these with the naked eye, and we need specialist equipment to actually identify these tiny little particles. So because we know so little about nanoplastics in the marine environment, core samples of beach sediment were actually taken to a depth of 5 centimeters on this East Beach, which is pictured here, to specifically look at whether nanoplastics were present. So these samples were sent to the UK for analysis, and from there we were actually able to extrapolate the findings for the entire area of East Beach and estimated that over 4 billion nanoplastic particles are present in just that top 5 centimeters of sediment on that one beach. And that beach is about 2.2 kilometers in length. So I think it's a really huge wake-up call, particularly given the remoteness of this island. So now I'm sure that many of you are already aware of the physical effects of plastics on our wildlife and marine life. But just as a refresher, plastics can of course be deadly through causing entanglements, entrapments, and plastics are also commonly ingested as they're misidentified either visually or by smell as being food items. So just diving a little further into plastic ingestion here, plastic ingestion doesn't just lead to physical obstructions and lesions through the digestive system of our wildlife, but also these can cause physiological effects in our wildlife too. So to explain this, we need to try and visualize plastics fragmenting out in the open ocean again. So as plastics fragment over time, these plastic particles can become quite rough and rigid, and this allows them to absorb any pollutants that may be present in the water that the plastics are passing through. So maybe they're passing through an area where there's been industrial runoff, or there's any kind of other pollutant that's from human activities that have entered these waterways. This turns these plastic particles into highly concentrated pills of chemicals. And when these plastics are ingested by wildlife, these chemicals embedded within the plastics may be able to then leach out and pass through an organism's blood barrier. Now, there's a number of studies that have shown ingested plastics can act as endocrine disruptors. So this can cause a range of hormonal imbalances. And that could lead to changes in growth rates, sexual maturity, reproductive output, and general behaviours of an organism. So once an organism becomes contaminated with these chemicals, if that animal is predated by a predator, those chemicals can actually become more and more noxious the further they are consumed up the food chain. So the next few slides, I'm just going to show a few examples of plastic-specific interactions with some of Henderson's wildlife. So hermit crabs are being impacted quite heavily by plastics on our remote islands, and a study by my past supervisor has actually found that plastic entrapment for both Henderson Island and another island called Cocos Keeling Islands have found over 500,000 hermit crabs are being entrapped in plastics every single year. And one specific example from Henderson Island was a container that held 500 deceased organisms within it. So it appears one of those organisms that had actually fallen into the container, it couldn't get out, it eventually passed away, and that decaying matter drew all these other scavenging organisms over to that same container, and they all just kept dropping in there, unable to get out, which was quite a sad thing to see. So every year as well, we've got our female endangered green sea turtles that haul themselves up on Henderson Island's east beach to lay their eggs in the sand. And there have been numerous studies from other parts of the world that have found that plastics act as physical barriers to both the females as they haul themselves up the beach, as well as the hatchlings that they then need to navigate these new objects on their race to get to the ocean. So the image here is actually of a turtle hatchling from East Beach on Henderson Island that did become entrapped in this broken drum. Something that I found really interesting myself is that plastics do hold heating properties. And for anyone that may not be aware, turtles use what's called temperature sex determination for their offspring, which means depending on the heat of the sand the eggs are laid in, this will depict which sex the offspring will be. So for example, if the beach sand is maybe 2 degrees warmer than average, this would result in female offspring. So it's possible with the aid of a warming climate that plastics embedded in beach sediment could increase the heat of the sand around it. And this could eventually cause a bias in the sex ratio of turtle offspring. So it could affect future reproductive efforts for our turtles around the world, which I think is really interesting. So I guess one of the main takeaways from today is that the plastics we use, no matter where we are in the world, they have to go somewhere. And we can't rely on recycling to solve this crisis because we're just exceeding recycling capabilities. And plastic materials themselves are so durable that they can withstand some really harsh conditions and they can persist hundreds, possibly even thousands of years. So we each need to recognise the power we hold as consumers. Rather than list specific items to steer clear of as a way of us to tackle this issue, I think it's important to instead think more broadly about reducing our impact on the world around us. We need to be changing our consumer habits, try to even picture the life cycle of these products we're consuming, think of the entire process from the oil extraction, manufacturing, transport, the use itself, how long that item will be used. Is it going to be 10 minutes for it to be have a drink from it? And then potentially hundreds of years until it disappears. So with plastic pollution, we need to be switching the tap off at the source. Otherwise, we're just forever going to be playing this, trying to play this game of catch up. So the sooner we can switch it off, the better. Now, if everyone can just take a look at the image on the left here, this is a brilliant image created by the photographer Mandy Barker. From a distance, it looks like a really beautiful display of marine invertebrates, maybe some soft corals, but it's actually plastic rope from Henderson Island. So this is showing really nicely that if we are fooled by plastics visually, how are the animals in the wild coping with it? So I believe quite strongly that incorporating art, whether that be physically creating something from plastics or using photography or videography, we can create awareness that may just pull on the heartstrings of those in positions of power that could enact change. So maybe our leaders, policymakers, big businesses or manufacturers might see this. Now, this is going to sound really corny, but I still want to say it. I'm also a firm believer in just doing something, giving a voice for something or someone that can't be a voice for themselves in whichever pocket of the world that we're in. So no matter what that may be, whether it's local biodiversity loss, plastic pollution, any other human-related issues that we've caused, without even realizing, we could be creating a domino effect of change within our own circle of friends and family, even broader communities. So that's just by creating dialogue and having conversations with the people around us that maybe some advocacy groups haven't been able to reach. So you just never know the reach potential of your own actions, as small as you think they may be. So I really can't thank you all enough for listening today. Anyone wanting to read a little bit more about our paper from Henderson, please do have a look at that, and check out the Adrift Lab if you'd like to look at recent findings or even some study opportunities for anyone interested. And also just a massive thank you to the organisers and participants of this event. I've just been in absolute awe of the speakers and the incredible work that so many passionate people are involved in around the world. So thank you all so much.
All right, Emma, thank you so much. That was a great presentation, and I don't think that's corny at all. I mean, that's what we need. We need to be doing something, and maybe that action doesn't seem like a lot, but 100 other people doing something, 1,000, a million, right? It all adds up. So we can't use that mentality of I'm just one person, because a lot of one person's acting together can make a huge difference.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Very cool. So you talked about Henderson being, considered one of the most remote places on the planet. What's the process like for getting there?
So there's actually, it's got to be a flight. There's a lot of flights involved, and then there's a ship voyage, which takes quite a long time as well. And then getting on the actual island itself, there's no jetty, so you'd be basically jumping off into knee-deep water to get onto the island. So it's as remote can be, to be honest, which is perfect for study opportunities.
Yeah, and then how long would you spend there?
I myself did not actually spend time on the island. Jen, though, the first year that she was there, my past supervisor, Jennifer was there for 3 months, I believe. And then last year it was multiple weeks that she was there. So just an incredible opportunity for them.
Yeah, absolutely. And now, I mean, all that garbage on the beach, I mean, I guess there isn't really much they can do about it, right? It's kind of, or can they take some of it off with them?
Yeah, so they did actually try to remove some of those plastics. Well, not remove, but they, gathered what they could from the island. But then they couldn't physically get it off the island because there's no docking spot for a ship to come in. Those plastics are still on the island. So that's again why it's really important to look at this as we can't just solve this problem by going out there and cleaning it up, because if we're just cleaning it up, all we're ever going to be doing is cleaning things up. And as you've heard as well, I mean, plastics are just breaking down more and more, and it's just impossible to be capturing plastics that we can't even see with the naked eye once they've got to that stage. So I think it's a good point.
I always think of that, that analogy. If you came in the bathroom and your tub was overflowing, would you just keep mopping the floor, or would you turn off the tap? And sure, cleanup is important, but we've got to stop the flow first.
Yeah, no, definitely. In saying that, though, I don't want to discourage people from doing beach cleanups, because obviously they're still really important for maybe the local species in your areas, and even in just raising awareness within the local community, getting kids out there involved, seeing this firsthand. It's a really important thing. So I don't want to discourage anyone from actually going to beach cleanups, because they still have a really big impact, whether this issue is still happening or not. So
no, it is a huge issue. I mean, even just washing your clothes and the microfibers coming off of your clothes, they're finding plastic samples in the air, in the Arctic, in the snow. It really has permeated our planet in so many different ways.
Yeah, No,
Yeah.
definitely.
So
And
what's next for you? What's next for your research?
yeah, that's a great question. So at the moment, I'm having a little bit of time off. But yeah, I guess it'd be in the future, would be wanting more studies being able to be held on Henderson Island. So getting the funding to go back there again is really important.
Yeah.
And then looking in general at remote islands, accumulation, and using them because they are so incredible at giving us, that they're acting as another colleague essentially, because they're giving us all this information and we don't really have to be doing anything. They're just presenting it for us. So
Yeah.
remote islands are just incredible in that way. So I think, yeah, getting some longitudinal studies is really important. So yeah, being able to gather some funding to do more research in these areas is really vital. And hopefully with the situation with the world's in at the moment, that will happen in the near future.
All right. Well, Emma, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for sharing that story and your research. And obviously, we wish you the best of luck and can't wait till we hear that you get out there to Henderson Island.
Thank you so much. Yeah, thanks again. This has just been such an awesome event. So thanks.
All right. Thanks, Emma. Bye.